So, humility pursued is already lost. Today I'm trying something a little different, stretching myself a little. I am not using a script, and I am using a topic that I've learned a lot about, that I'm still learning about. And so I feel confident that I can just speak off the cuff about it. And it's really about the virtues, or any virtue, but I've chosen humility because that was the one in relation to which I learned something that I am hoping to convey today. It began for me in a time when I needed to cut down my intake on extra foods, I'll call it, cookies and cake. Always a challenge for a pastor, because when you visit somewhere, that's what you get offered. And yet, being a pastor, you tend to be less active than when you're a dairy farm helper. And so I was aware that I needed to cut that back. And what I began to notice, along with a friend who was trying the same thing, that's my pig farmer friend Henry, who had a pig farm that he called his salmonary, while I was a student from seminary. And I always enjoyed the more practical lessons that he was learning at salmonary compared to the academic lessons I was trying to learn at seminary. And what we had a conversation about one time is how when there's a plate of cookies, and when you're in a place where you know you should not have a cookie, and you forbid yourself that cookie, you say, I shouldn't have that. It's almost as if the harder you say that, the more the cookie is calling you. In other words, you become obsessed with the cookie, with the not having it. You might not even be paying attention to the conversations in the room or anything else, because the cookies are calling you. And we found that rather bizarre, rather odd. And so together we were talking about and started exploring, is there a different way? And so for myself, I came to a place where I had to see the tray of cookies and I had to say, that is not good for you. It's slightly shifted from they're forbidden. That would not be good for you to have. They would taste good, acknowledge that. They would be enjoyable to eat, but it would not be good for your overall well-being for you to have that. And through practicing that, I became more able, slightly more able, to resist the cookies that were calling. So that's where I started to make a shift many, many years ago. And I still get to practice that because I still need to cut down on cookie intake. And so it's a lifelong journey of learning and just being aware, watching what happens in your mind when that first thought is, I can't have that. And there's a whole lot that comes with it that I also learned when I worked in addiction treatment for a time. But those are for another time. Like I said, this video is a little different. It is related to Synod Sensemaking, but it's more focused on a particular approach to one virtue that may be extendable to others. Related to this, and then sort of building on it, one day I'd probably seen some things about, what do they call them again, when the promise rings that young girls were making commitments to their dad that they would remain sexually virgins until they got married and all that kind of stuff. And they're very moving and very, very sweet in many ways. And then, but I was just thinking about that, because in a way that commitment is like deciding to cut down on cookies or to not have cookies, right? So then when those young girls come to a situation where there are cookies on the offering, euphemistically, then suddenly they're in a battle. The commitment was easy to make when they didn't understand what the cookies were going to be. So, and then since then, to add to that, but this is when I started thinking about what I'm presenting today. Since then, there's also been then stories shared of the struggles that these young women, it seemed to happen particularly to women. There was a male version of it as well. The struggles that they had when they were confronted with the reality of the promise they made and the difficulty of it. So again, in my background, the Christianity, the Reformed branch of Christianity I grew up under, and again, I'm talking about the cultural aspect of it. This didn't come so much from my home of origin, but it came by osmosis from the Christian school and other contexts where you learn some of these things. And so then I started thinking one day about the virtue of humility, right? The Bible clearly encourages humility, and you can find sermons that preach, be humble. But I also realized that I knew quite well the actions to take to appear humble. It's an old-fashioned example. Some younger people that see this might not understand it, but it used to be a thing. I mean, slightly before that, it was still a thing to tip your hat to a woman when you met her on the street. That was when I was a child. I still remember some of that happening. But opening a door for a female, for a woman, was a thing when I was still a teenager. And along with sort of giving up a seat in the bus and some of those kinds of things were considered actions of humility and consideration and culturally being civilized. And so I was thinking in those lines, and I realized that I could take all the actions that were needed to appear humble, but not really be it in my heart. And that was a bit of a struggle. Like, how do you resolve that within life, but also then within Christianity and within my understanding of what Christ calls us to, the humility that we are called to as his people. Now, theologically, I can explain some of that. I mean, Christ is greater than I. I need to set my own ego and self aside in order for Christ to live in and through me. And I've learned a few things about that, but that's also a lifetime learning thing. And so as I considered all this, I realized that in a similar way to the harder I tried to convince myself not to have a cookie, if I pursued humility, even just mentally, not by actions so much, but mentally it turns into actions, right? I'm missing the point. And so now I actually cringe when sermons like that are preached, because I think that misses the point. So here's how this works. I get up one morning, I do my morning devotions, I have a time of prayer, and I feel called especially to humility this particular day. And I start my day. And there's only one cup of coffee left, and somebody else wants it. Go ahead, you have the coffee. There's someone heading for a door at the same time of me, I won't make it a female, but there's someone, and I stop and hold the door open for them. And so on. All these actions of humility. I may be in a meeting and I think I have a great, great, great idea that's going to just change the world. And I hold it back because I'm practicing humility. The reality is, at least in my experience, hopefully you can relate to this, that all day long, I'm measuring my success at being humble. Right? Oh, wow, Pete, for me, it would be a struggle to hold back on an idea that I have, right? So, oh, wow, Pete, this is great. You are doing a really good job of that commitment to humility that you set for yourself this morning. Well, hold on a minute. What is that when I'm doing that? That's pride. And so on a day when I decide to pursue humility, I'm reinforcing my pride. Now, it might be happening secretly, but it's still in there in the heart. And who was that guy again that said that it's what's in the heart that is the most important? So what do you do then once you realize that? And the journey that I've been on since that realization is to give up on pursuing humility. I know, it sounds absurd. And I'm even hesitant to describe what I experience beyond that. So I think I'm just going to leave it as an encouragement. But I say this pridefully, or as humbly as I can, I've had more people remark about humility in evaluations and stuff like that about myself since I made that change than I remember ever hearing before. And because I was feeding my pride before, I would have mentally recorded when somebody remarked about humility. They might have said, oh, thank you for holding the door open, but they didn't call it humble in that sense. So that's something different. And that, to tie it kind of spiritually and theologically to Christianity and Reformed Christianity, that means that I am setting my tendency towards depravity, self-servingness aside, and then just letting happen what happens without weighing it as humility or not. I encourage you to think about it and to try to understand it and to try it out. It's hard to let go of the measuring of one's humility because many of us in Christianity have been encouraged in that direction for so long. And it's just totally bizarre that people might consider myself more humble, or that might remark about my humility in certain situations than ever before. Like, what is that? Now to tie it to other virtues. I wonder, I haven't thought about this much, but I wonder if it applies to other virtues. Honesty, other positives like that. If I'm weighing everything I say, going, wow, that's good honesty. Like, what is that? What's that feeding? If I have to say, when I'm about to speak a particular truth honestly, this is what is the case. What am I doing there? Does that mean the rest of the time I'm not being honest? And so on with the list of virtues. I wonder if that applies to any of them and all of them. Virtue pursued is already lost, is the grid to think of it through, hopefully because I've explained well how it works with humility. And then I wonder if it applies to chastity. Yeah, I'm going to leave it there. I'm going to leave it at that. So, humility pursued actively by the ego is already a lost cause when it comes to being like Jesus.